Hello everyone, Prime here, and you're having a great day, because today we're going to be talking about the woes of the average Mesopotamian man. Plenty of things from the constant wars, the elements, the laws, and the mythology or religions of the times may have hurt people in more ways than you might expect. And starting off with the expectations of the average man, wars were fought for more than just the pride of an ambitious king. Agricultural land and water supply were incredibly important elements for a city's survival. Different cities used different tactics in their battles, like the Sumerians calling their free men to take up arms instead of an army. Though there were expert soldiers, if you were a citizen, you'd bring your own sling or shield into battles, which was different from, say, Sargon of Akkad's approach, being to use an actual army. Then again, Sargon was more interested in conquest than Sumerians were. Hammurabi of Babylonia used similar tactics and an army, so the Sumerians were unique in comparison to these two. Wars were common in ancient Mesopotamia, and the king was expected to handle the finances of these conflicts. In other words, taxes. They were used to maintain the armies, the city walls, construction of temples, and other things that you might expect taxes to help with. Commoners didn't have it that much worse off, though. Yes, they could be taxed for their labor, products that they sold. Yes, they could be drafted into the military if needed, but most owned their own land and could move up the social ladder if the profession allowed it, or they married the right person. Buying land meant that they might rent it out and of course make more money that way, and the foods that they ate, whilst mostly plain perhaps, barley porridges, breads, meat stews, and so on, even the rich liked good old-fashioned and affordable beer. Their clothes did a decent job at protecting them from the heat, and whitewashing allowed their homes to reflect the sun's warmth to some degree. They even had access to honey-sweetened cakes, so when you consider that, the commoners really didn't have it all that bad, at least on the surface. That said, the elements could have been an issue depending on where in Mesopotamia you lived. You might have to deal with flooding, say. Besides not being good in general, flooding was a major problem for crops, and whilst there were attempts by some to deal with the issue by digging canals, say, this didn't always happen. The wealthiest of ancient Mesopotamia, besides royalty and priests, consisted of well-performing higher-ups in the military and successful merchants that had set up their own business networks or had just done really well for themselves in their trade. Cities may have argued, but business still happened where it could. Scribes were also respected and sought after, as the cuneiform writing took years to learn to a useful enough level and wasn't exactly an accessible thing, though it could be taught to you in schools, and those who had a decent level of it could, perhaps profit from teaching it. But all of that said, laws were still a thing, and they could be particularly restrictive or potentially unfair, depending on your perspective. After taking Babylon, King Urnama was among the first Mesopotamian kings to establish laws. His were easy to understand, like, if a man commits a murder, he will be killed, or if a man proceeded to, by force, deflower the virgin female slave of another man, that man must pay 5 shekels of silver. Simple stuff. Though you might disagree with the amount on that latter law. The laws mostly leave little room for interpretation or abstraction. There's no room to ponder when someone has committed robbery or murder, unlike our laws that provide different outcomes concerning self-defense, say. These laws aren't quite perfect, but I doubt anyone with half a brain would have the balls to point this out to the king themselves. Some laws even incorporated matters of faith and mythology, such as the law that stated that if a man is accused of sorcery, he must undergo ordeal by water. If he is proven innocent, his accuser must pay 3 shekels. Ordeals by water usually consisted of the suspected magic user, in this case to be dragged down to the nearest body of water, stripped to their underwear, bound, and then released into the river. If they were guilty, then their body would float, and the gods would have decided their guilt. If proven innocent, then the body would sink to the depths. The body, hopefully living, would be pulled from the depths, and the person would be proven innocent. Yes, the shekel changed in value depending on who was in charge, but there was usually 4 tiers of coin, and silver was usually the second highest. Still, it wasn't that much, especially to survive drowning for. And as you can tell, yes, there were imperfections in the law. Later kings provided updated laws with more clauses to them, though they still followed the same, if person does blank, then blank will happen. If anyone finds an ox, a horse, or a mule, he shall drove it to the king's estate. If he finds it in the country, he shall present it to the elders. The finder may use the animal whilst it is in his custody. When this owner finds it, he shall take it back, but he shall not have the finder arrested as a thief. But if the finder does not present it to the elders, he shall be considered a thief. The Code of Hammurabi was known for its eye for an eye approach to justice. You could lose a body part, say, for taking away someone else's, but for the top-tier crimes, top-tier punishments were in order. Incest would have the guilty parties burnt alive. At least this code changes the appeal of a water ordeal for the accusers by allowing them to keep the house of the accused should they drown and therefore be punished by the gods, but also be put to death if the accused survived. Doesn't seem worth it to report your local sorcerer if you're going to potentially die because of it. But hey, at least you're not wasting, what would that be, the equivalent of police or law's time, right? You might have gotten the sense that some of these laws were tilted in favor of some, but there were a few safety nets in place to prevent things from getting too unbalanced for the average man, slave, or woman. Most lines of work had sections stating that employees were to be paid a minimum of X shekels or gur of barley, and so on per year. The amount was lower for slaves, but everyone could expect to be paid for their labor and protected under the law at least. So, in other words, it was pretty much minimum wage. Crimes had to be reported to elders, kings, or just people in that sort of authoritative position, and if proof wasn't given of the accused guilt, then the accuser would be put to death. Of course, this was a more updated version of the laws, but yes, you see how that would be a more effective system. Life got better as things progressed. Now moving on to the religion and mythology aspect of the video, before kings, priests were the most powerful and important figures of Mesopotamia, and even ruled as their power came from the gods himself, according to the cities and the society. Each city had their own patron god or goddesses, and the religion was an essential part of Mesopotamian life. Even when kings came about, it was thought that they were partly divine in some way. Priests and priestesses were still very important and received great honor and respect for their service as they bridged the gap between the people and the gods. You always wanted to be on good terms with the gods. It would bring you a better life, also people believed. Priestesses even acted as early doctors and dentists, helping patients near or in their temples. Priestesses were also required to have an education and were the only ladies that got one. Of course, there are exceptions in everything, but, like their male counterparts, they had to be in perfect health and come from a wealthy, well-off family. Unlike priests, though, they had to be celibate and couldn't be mothers, though they could marry and help their husband raise stepchildren. That said, most lived in temples to focus on their duties to the king and the people. Now, the only exception to this priestesses must be celibate thing was a certain religious practice involving priestesses and either a priest or a king, in which they would mirror the goddess of fertility by engaging in certain activities with their male counterparts. So there's that. And just felt like mentioning that, but the Mesopotamians believed that the world was flat and surrounded everything that existed. Air, breath, and the sea, Abzu. When you died, you were going to the underworld to be judged by Utu, and his judgment could bring happiness in the afterlife. Not that many people wanted to think that much about dying or going to the afterlife or the underworld generally, but yeah. So just to sum up the woes of the average Mesopotamian man, assuming that you didn't have the nicest job in the world, you could be subject to the horrors of war, potentially having to have your own equipment ready, and in Mesopotamian times, war was a common thing, so you probably were going to be involved in some sort of conflict in your life. You constantly wanted to do your best to make sure that you were on the right side of the gods if you believed in the religion, which you probably did. The laws could be pretty unfair to you in some cases, and quite vile and horrible, and you could lose various limbs or other parts of you, and in other cases, you just have to pay a bit of money, which may vary in significance depending on how good your profession paid you, of course. You more or less enjoyed the comforts of your life when you could. Flooding was an ever-present concern, but as long as you didn't drown or lose the majority of your crops or essential things to your life, you were golden. And all in all, things weren't that bad in Mesopotamia. Not amazing, but not that bad. Sorcery added an interesting spice to things because of the inherent belief in its potency, but we don't know that much about how the practice worked, other than that it was frowned upon by the state and the faith. In fact, priests were equipped to deal with someone who'd been stricken by illness, and one of the checks was for curse via sorcery. How exactly you'd go about proving that someone was practicing sorcery or planning to harm you with it, especially in the absence of written documents or things like that, is anyone's guess, really. And also consider the hefty punishments behind sorcery, directly death in some cases, but sometimes not quite that, but death is supposed to be the result of the punishment of sorcery. But sorcery wasn't necessarily a wholly bad thing, and priests would use sorcery that was a good type of sorcery, that wasn't the bad type of sorcery. So, yeah, I suppose that's overcomplicating it a little, but I think you get the point. Best to just stay away from sorcery entirely if you could, I guess. But yes, that was the video on the lives of the people of Mesopotamia. Tell me what you thought. Do you feel like I missed something very specific or very crucial that could have tipped the balance of how bad life could have been? Do you feel like this was a life that you wouldn't mind living? Tell me your thoughts in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video and feel like it deserves it, go ahead and leave a like. Helps me out, gives me a bit of motivation on the next video. It's always just good stuff. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. And if you'd like me to do a similar video like this for another potential society or civilization, go ahead and leave some suggestions in the comments below. But till the next video, have a very good day. I've been Prime. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.